Today we're going to talk about writing your own creation myth. So this is following up on the creation myth assignment y'all did earlier this week. So what we've seen so far, you've just finished reading 2 creation myths about how the world was created. And you know that there are 7 traits of creation myths. First, belief in the great creator, the interplay between the sacred and the natural, assistance from animals, women in important roles, bending or breaking natural law, the presence of an underdog, and finally, the respect for elders and their wisdom. So where we're going next. The following video is a different kind of creation myth. It's an origin myth. Rather than showing how the world came to exist, origin myths explain how someone or something came to be the way that it is now. So instead of how the world was created, it's how animals were given certain traits, usually. So we're going to watch this video, and it's a Karuk myth, how the coyote got his cunning. Cunning means the ability to get what one wants through trickery.
In the beginning, the god Karea created the world, and on it he put all of the animals. Everything from the mighty killer whale to the magnificent thunderbird, and even the humble frog. Now the last creature he created was called the man, and to the man he gave a very special task. The man would rank all of the other animals of the world by making a set of bows of different lengths. The longest bow would go to the strongest animal, and the shortest one would go to the weakest. Karea and the man gathered all of the animals together to tell them the news, and to tell them to arrive the next morning to receive their bows and to receive their ranks. But one of these animals, the coyote, was especially clever, and he began to hatch a plan. If I stay awake all night, he thought, then I could be first in line tomorrow, and then I'd get the longest bow. And when I'm the strongest animal, I'll be able to eat all the other ones for breakfast. And as night fell and the other animals began to sleep, the coyote lay down, but he only pretended to sleep. Night passed, and dawn was just about to break, and the coyote had been awake all night long and was almost about to drift off to sleep. So he got up and he ran around the world 4 times to try and get himself awake. But that made him even more tired than before, and he collapsed in a deep slumber. Dawn came, and all the animals lined up to receive their bows. But at the end of the ceremony, there was one bow still left. The man began to wonder what animal was missing. The other animals soon discovered the coyote, still fast asleep, and woke him up. Ashamed that his plan had failed, he went to the man, who presented him with the last bow, the shortest one of them all, even shorter than frogs, and all the other animals laughed at him. The coyote, who had schemed to become the strongest animal in the world, would now be the weakest, and in his embarrassment, he also became the angriest. But the man took pity on the poor coyote, and he prayed to Karea on his behalf. Karea listened, and he presented the coyote with a special gift, the gift of cunning. Though he would never be the strongest animal, or the fastest, he would be the cleverest. This is how the coyote got his cunning.
All right, so I'm sure in that myth you saw some of the traits that we talked about with creation myths, but origin myths are a little bit different, and we're going to talk about them in a little bit of a different way. And this is going to roll over to the next unit we do as well. So origin myths focus on a specific period of time during the creation of the world. This is their setting. It's a specific moment where something's happening. In the Karuk myth you just watched, that specific moment was just after man was created. The Creator then gave man a task. And this is the next aspect of origin myths. There's a task that must be accomplished. In this case, that task was rating the animals from the strongest to the weakest, using bows of varying sizes to represent that ranking. Once the task is set, the audience is introduced to the character or the animal that the origin story is focused on. In the Karuk myth, this is the coyote, who was especially clever and who began to hatch a plan about how he can get the biggest bow. This is the introduction of the story's situation or the conflict. In this story, and in many other Native American myths, the coyote is a trickster. However, not all origin stories are about naughty characters who get punished in some way. They can also be about good, brave characters who are rewarded. You saw this on Earth on Turtle's Back with Muskrat and Turtle, where it said to this day there are marks at the back of Turtle's shell that were made by Muskrat's paw when he placed the soil on the turtle's shell. That tells you why those marks are present on Turtle's back, the origin of those markings. We're actually going to talk about trickster stories a lot more in a little bit, later on in a different unit, and we'll get to look at some more trickster stories. So the story gets going. Once the setting, character, and conflict have been established, altogether the setting, the character, the conflict, all that setup, that's called the exposition. The story after the exposition, the story begins its rising action, which is exactly what it sounds like. The rising action lays out what the character chooses to do. In the Karuk myth, the rising action is the coyote's plan to stay awake all night so he can be the first to receive his ranking. The rising action also includes his running around the world 4 times to try and keep himself awake. The rising action then leads us into the most important section of the story. The most important moment in the story is the climax. So the rising action leads us into the climax of the story. The climax is the most intense, exciting, or important part of the story. It's that moment where everything changes. It is the culmination, the crescendo of everything that's come before it, where all the events of the story come together. In the Karuk myth, the climax occurs when Coyote collapses into a deep slumber. After the climax of every story comes the falling action. The falling action is just the reverse of the rising action. It's when we get all the details about the fallout from the climax. In the Karuk myth, the falling action includes the other animals receiving their rankings, looking for Coyote and finding him asleep, Coyote receiving his ranking and the others laughing at him, and Coyote's shame and anger at his failure. Finally, we get to the last section of the story. It's called the resolution. A resolution is when the conflict of the story is solved and everything, or nearly everything, is tied up into a neat bow. In the Karuk myth, the resolution occurs when man prays to the Creator on behalf of Coyote, and Coyote is then given a gift. He is given the gift of cunning. And although he would never be the strongest animal or the fastest, he would be the cleverest. So there's a chart that we can use to map out all of the aspects of stories. You've probably seen this chart before. It's called a plot diagram. It looks like this. Looks like a heartbeat. So with the plot diagram, we have all of our different pieces that show up. Our exposition, which includes the setting, the task, and the characters. You have your conflict, rising action. Generally, we show this as 3 different boxes: rising action 1, rising action 2, rising action 3. The climax, falling action. You have multiple boxes for this one as well. And finally, we have our resolution. So what does the plot diagram look like for the Karuk myth? So we have our exposition. The setting, like we talked about, is just after man was created. The task, man has been given a task to rate the animals. And then the characters, we have our protagonist, our main character, the coyote. Then we have man, the creator, and the other animals. Next, we have our conflict, right? So our conflict is that Coyote wants to be awarded the biggest bow out of all the other animals instead of believing he deserved it, believing that he would have gotten awarded it if he'd done what the other animals did. He hatches a plan to get it through trickery so he can be the first one there. So our rising action comes in next. First, he decides that he'll stay up all night in order to get the bow. Then he manages to keep himself awake almost until dawn, but then he gets tired. So he decides to run around the earth 4 times to keep himself awake, but this makes him even more tired. So we hit our climax. The coyote falls asleep and misses the ranking ceremony altogether. Our first falling action, the man notices someone is missing from the ranking ceremony, so he and all the other animals search, finding Coyote asleep. Then Coyote is given the smallest bow, and all the other animals laugh at him. And finally, Coyote is ashamed and becomes extremely angry. So next we have our resolution. Man feels sympathy for Coyote and prays to the Creator, who gifts Coyote with cunning, so that even though he will not be the strongest or the fastest, he will be the most clever of all the other animals. So what are we doing next? Here's your task. You're going to write your own origin myth. And by your own, I mean that you are going to make one up. You are going to create one on your own, not search the internet for one. You should choose an animal or a situation and create a story to explain how what you chose came to exist. You can do this on a Google Doc or a Google slideshow that you create, and you'll just add that onto the assignment. Feel free to add images, be as creative as you want with the presentation of your story. Make it pretty, make it creative. Your origin myth should include all of the story aspects that we learned about today. You should be able to create a plot diagram for your own story without any missing pieces. I'm not going to make you do one for your story, but that's a great way for you to check yourself to see if you have everything that you could possibly need. If you can do a plot diagram and fill it in correctly, you're good to go. So below are some concepts to kind of help you get started if you're stuck. Feel free to come up with something that's not listed here. Some of these are just silly, some of them made me laugh, so I included them here. How zebras got their stripes. If you Google it, there's a lot of videos for this one, especially really annoying videos for little kids to kind of give you an image of something else to do. But don't take someone else's story. I will know. How giraffes got their spots. How snails got their shells. How birds got their wings. How spiders learned to weave their webs. How dogs learned to bark. How platypuses got their bills. How geese learned to bite. How parrots learned to talk. How penguins got their tuxedos. How raccoons got their masks. The idea is, how did an animal become the way it is? I look forward to reading your stories. Message me, email me, meet me on the chat if you need help. Good luck, guys.